inside Forrester Creations had always carried a particular rhythm, a steady pulse that echoed through glass corridors and polished conference tables. Under the leadership of Brooke Logan, that rhythm had become both confident and calculated. She moved through the executive floor with assurance, her voice calm during board meetings, her decisions sharp and forward-looking. Years of scandal, heartbreak, and public scrutiny had forged in her a resilience that few could rival. She believed she had earned her place at the top not only through loyalty to the Forrester legacy, but through sheer survival. Yet beneath that composed exterior, a quiet unease had begun to stir. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, the unease had a name she had not spoken aloud in years: Ivy Forrester. Ivy's return to Los Angeles had not been celebrated. It had been noted, a brief ripple in conversation, a whisper in hallways. Brooke had dismissed it publicly, assuring herself that whatever tensions once existed between them were relics of another era. But she underestimated Ivy's capacity for patience. Ivy did not storm back into the company demanding recognition. She waited, she observed, she allowed Brooke to settle into a comfortable illusion of security. The confrontation came without warning. Late afternoon light poured through the CEO office windows when the door opened without ceremony. Brooke looked up, expecting an assistant, perhaps a designer with last-minute revisions. Instead she saw Ivy standing in the doorway, posture rigid, expression stripped of warmth. In her hands was a thick file, bound tightly, its edges worn from use. There was no greeting, no preamble, only silence heavy enough to compress the air. Ivy stepped inside and closed the door deliberately, shutting out the hum of the executive floor. She placed the file on Brooke's desk with careful precision, as though presenting evidence in a courtroom. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried no anger, only clarity. She said she had come to correct an imbalance. Brooke attempted composure, leaning back in her chair, refusing to concede emotional ground. She asked what Ivy wanted. The answer was contained within the file. Inside were documents Brooke had not seen in years. Financial reports from a turbulent chapter in Forrester history. Internal transfers. Strategic reallocations that had skirted regulatory boundaries. At the time, Brooke had justified them as necessary maneuvers to stabilize the company against hostile acquisition. The board had been fragmented. The threat had been real. She had acted swiftly, perhaps recklessly, believing the ends would justify the means. The issue had faded from public memory, buried beneath subsequent successes. But it had not disappeared. Ivy had uncovered every detail. Bank records, internal memos, signatures that bore Brooke's authorization. The evidence was not circumstantial, it was meticulous. Brooke's hands trembled slightly as she turned page after page, recognizing the gravity of what she was seeing. This was not rumor. It was documentation. Convincing. Irrefutable. Ivy did not shout. She did not accuse Brooke of moral failure. She simply explained the consequences if the file were released publicly. Regulatory investigations. Shareholder panic. Media frenzy. The Logan name dragged through scandal yet again. Brooke felt the past surge forward with merciless clarity. She had believed that chapter closed. She had believed her intentions shielded her from judgment. Now she understood how fragile that shield had been. The ultimatum came quietly. Brooke would step down as CEO immediately and transfer executive authority to Ivy. In return, the file would remain sealed. The scandal would remain dormant. It was not a negotiation. It was a transaction framed as mercy. Brooke's mind raced through possible responses. Denial was impossible. Legal confrontation would only accelerate exposure. Confession would devastate the company she had fought to protect. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her with suffocating force. She had spent years rebuilding trust after previous betrayals. Now she faced the reality that her own past decisions could destroy everything again. There was a moment, brief but real, when Brooke considered defiance. She imagined confronting Ivy publicly, exposing the blackmail attempt, forcing transparency. But she saw too clearly the ripple effect. Forrester Creations would not survive another scandal unscathed. The employees who depended on its stability would suffer. The Logan name would fracture under scrutiny. And Ridge Forrester had stood beside her through storms that might have ended lesser unions. Brooke knew the revelation of financial misconduct, even if contextualized, would erode the trust he had painstakingly restored. She felt cornered not by Ivy alone, but by her own history. Her voice, when she agreed, sounded distant even to herself. She would resign. The words tasted like surrender. Ivy's expression did not soften. She accepted the concession with clinical efficiency. Within hours, formal documentation was drafted. The board, blindsided and confused, was informed of a personal decision by Brooke to step aside for the good of the company. Ivy was appointed interim CEO pending official ratification. The transition was swift, almost surgical. Brooke packed her office in silence. Photographs of family, awards, framed magazine covers. Each item felt like a relic of a life abruptly severed. As she walked through the executive floor one final time, employees avoided direct eye contact, sensing tension but unaware of its origin. Brooke felt not anger but hollow collapse, as though her identity had been extracted piece by piece. Ivy wasted no time asserting authority. Her first directive stunned the creative department. Logan Fashion House, a division closely associated with Brooke and her sister, would be withdrawn from the market immediately. Production halted, distribution contracts suspended, marketing campaigns terminated. The justification cited strategic realignment, but the motive was unmistakable. Katie Logan learned of the decision not through private conversation but through an official memorandum. Shock turned rapidly into fury. She stormed into the executive office, demanding explanation. Ivy remained composed, seated in the chair that had so recently belonged to Brooke. She described the move as necessary to eliminate redundancy and strengthen brand cohesion. Katie recognized the language of corporate strategy, but beneath it she saw revenge. Katie's anger collided with powerlessness. Without Brooke at the helm, her leverage evaporated. The board, unaware of the underlying blackmail, deferred to Ivy's authority. Logan Fashion House, once a symbol of resilience and feminine empowerment, was reduced to collateral damage in Ivy's ascent. Ridge arrived soon after, summoned by rumors that something was deeply wrong. The sight of Ivy in the CEO chair ignited immediate fury. He demanded explanation, demanded Brooke's presence. Ivy provided carefully curated information, citing Brooke's voluntary resignation and the need for decisive leadership. Ridge sensed deception but lacked evidence. The board had approved the transition. Contracts were being amended. Legally, Ivy's authority stood firm. Ridge confronted Brooke privately, desperation etched across his features. Brooke struggled to maintain composure, offering only partial truths. She framed her resignation as sacrifice, as strategic necessity. Ridge felt the familiar sting of secrets resurfacing between them. He could see the pain in her eyes but could not reach its source. The barrier between them thickened with every unanswered question. Inside the executive office, Ivy allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had not clawed her way back into power through open warfare. She had used precision, patience, and leverage. The Logan legacy that had long overshadowed her presence within the family now stood vulnerable. Yet Ivy was not finished. As Ridge's anger reverberated through the halls and Katie's outrage simmered, Ivy declared quietly that this was only the beginning. The Logan dynasty, she implied, would face reckoning beyond a single corporate division. The atmosphere within Forrester Creations shifted palpably. Designers whispered about instability. Executives questioned long-term viability. The Logan sisters felt besieged from within their own company. Brooke retreated into isolation, grappling with guilt that extended beyond personal loss. She had believed her past misjudgments buried. Now she saw how unresolved choices could metastasize years later. The episode closed with a stark contrast. In the dim light of the executive suite, Ivy sat alone in the CEO chair, hands folded calmly atop the desk. The skyline glittered behind her, reflecting triumph. Across town, the Logan family gathered in subdued despair, confronting the reality that power had shifted irrevocably. Brooke stared at the horizon from her balcony, feeling the weight of collapse not just in her career but in her identity. Ivy's smile, subtle and victorious, suggested that what had unfolded was not revenge alone but recalibration of legacy. The question no longer lingered about who controlled Forrester Creations. It hung ominously over something far more fragile: whether the Logan family could survive the storm that one of their own past decisions had invited. The night after Ivy claimed the CEO chair, Forrester Creations did not sleep. Lights burned late across the executive floor as departments scrambled to interpret new directives. Contracts were reviewed. Marketing budgets were frozen. Logan Fashion House's digital storefront went dark without ceremony, its homepage replaced by a sterile message citing strategic restructuring. Inside the Logan home, the silence felt heavier than outrage. The humiliation was not loud, it was suffocating. Brooke Logan sat alone long after the others had gone to bed, replaying every decision that had led to this moment. She had once believed leadership required decisiveness, even ruthlessness. Years ago, when financial instability threatened Forrester Creations, she had acted swiftly, redirecting funds and authorizing maneuvers that pushed ethical boundaries but kept the company afloat. At the time, she told herself it was sacrifice for survival. Now she understood the cost of that justification. The past had not forgiven her. It had waited. Ridge Forrester could not reconcile the woman he loved with the silence she maintained. He sensed she was protecting him from something. But protection built on secrecy was a fragile shield. His frustration was not solely about corporate power. It was about trust. He felt the ground shifting beneath their marriage once again. Not because of infidelity or rivalry, but because Brooke had chosen to face catastrophe alone. He wanted to fight for her, but she would not tell him who the enemy truly was. Meanwhile, Ivy Forrester wasted no time consolidating authority. She held meetings with department heads, presenting herself as pragmatic and forward-thinking. Her tone was measured, her demeanor composed, but beneath that composure lay intention sharpened by years of perceived marginalization. She framed the removal of Logan Fashion House as a financial necessity, citing overlapping demographics and diluted branding. The logic sounded convincing. It was also deliberately impersonal, stripping the decision of its emotional undercurrent. Katie Logan refused to accept that explanation. She stormed into the boardroom during one such session, her anger cutting through Ivy's curated professionalism. She accused Ivy of weaponizing corporate authority to settle personal scores. Ivy did not raise her voice. She responded with documents, projections, forecasts. She positioned Katie's objection as emotional instability rather than strategic disagreement. The board members, wary of scandal and eager for stability, leaned toward Ivy's narrative. Katie left the room shaken, recognizing that fury without leverage was powerless. The ripple effect extended beyond corporate walls. Investors noticed the sudden restructuring. Industry insiders whispered about Brooke's abrupt resignation. Competitors began testing vulnerabilities. Ivy understood that dominance required more than symbolic gestures. She initiated aggressive cost-cutting measures and announced a new luxury capsule line under the Forrester name alone, subtly erasing Logan influence from upcoming campaigns. Every billboard, every social media post, every runway teaser carried the quiet message that a new era had begun. Brooke's internal collapse deepened when she saw the first promotional draft excluding the Logan legacy entirely. She had not just lost a position, she had lost a narrative she helped build. For decades, the Logan name had intertwined with Forrester identity, fueling its evolution and controversy alike. Now it was being surgically removed as though it had been an infection rather than a cornerstone. Ridge confronted Ivy directly in her office days later. He demanded transparency about the documents she held over Brooke. Ivy refused to confirm blackmail, maintaining the facade of voluntary transition. Her composure infuriated him. He saw in her eyes not insecurity, but certainty. She believed she was correcting history. She believed she was restoring balance. Ridge warned her that leadership built on coercion could not sustain loyalty. Ivy countered that leadership built on sentiment had already weakened the company. The fracture between Forrester and Logan widened. Katie began exploring legal avenues, searching for procedural errors in Ivy's appointment. Every attempt stalled against airtight documentation. Ivy had anticipated resistance. She had studied bylaws meticulously before making her move. The board's ratification stood firm. The power shift was legitimate on paper, even if morally contested. Brooke, trapped between guilt and defiance, finally allowed herself to confide partially in Ridge. She admitted to financial irregularities in the past, framing them as desperate measures during crisis. Ridge listened in stunned silence. He did not condemn her outright, but the revelation unsettled him. He had always believed Brooke's flaws were emotional, impulsive. Discovering calculated financial manipulation forced him to reevaluate their shared history. Trust fractured quietly, not in rage but in doubt. As days passed, Ivy's ambition expanded. She began reviewing archival projects associated with Logan branding, evaluating which intellectual properties could be absorbed and rebranded under Forrester exclusivity. The erasure was systematic. Katie watched helplessly as design teams were reassigned and production facilities repurposed. Employees loyal to the Logan aesthetic felt displaced, their creative identity diluted under new directives. Publicly, Ivy projected stability. Interviews with fashion media painted her as visionary, committed to innovation and unity. She spoke of honoring the Forrester heritage while embracing modernization. Privately, she allowed herself moments of triumph. Sitting in the CEO chair late at night, overlooking the city lights, she felt vindicated. For years she had been sidelined, underestimated, treated as peripheral to the core power structure. Now she controlled it, yet control came with isolation. Even allies regarded her cautiously. The board supported her authority but did not trust her entirely. Ridge's hostility simmered openly. Katie's resentment hardened into strategy. Brooke's silence felt less like defeat and more like calculation. Ivy sensed the tension gathering around her, but she mistook it for envy rather than impending resistance. The emotional cost within the Logan family became evident. Gathered together, they no longer discussed fashion strategy or brand revival. They discussed survival. Brooke wrestled with the temptation to confess everything publicly, to strip Ivy of leverage by owning her past mistakes. Katie urged caution, fearing irreversible damage. Ridge oscillated between anger at Ivy and disappointment in Brooke. Their conversations ended unresolved, heavy with unspoken fear. The episode's closing movement unfolded in stark contrast. Ivy presided over her first major board meeting as confirmed CEO. Her posture poised, her tone decisive. She announced expansion plans, new partnerships, and a streamlined brand identity free from what she termed legacy entanglements. The words were precise, but their meaning clear. The Logan influence would fade. Across town, Brooke stood on the balcony of her home, watching the city shimmer under nightfall. She felt stripped of title and authority, yet something beneath her despair began to stir. Regret had paralyzed her long enough. She understood now that silence had empowered Ivy once, it would not do so again. Whether through confession, legal maneuver, or alliance, she would not allow the Logan name to dissolve quietly. Back in the executive suite, Ivy leaned back in the chair that had once symbolized Brooke's triumph. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, believing she had orchestrated the opening chapter of total Logan collapse. What she did not yet recognize was that every empire built on coercion breeds resistance. And in the quiet spaces where humiliation turns into resolve, a counterstrike begins to take shape.